Players, viewers, and even some well-known content creators have stated in the past that there is not much of a difference between Masters and Champions events.
There's not much difference between the Masters and Champions. It's the same teams that come, it's the same performance. The only thing that's different is like the title name of it, or like the trophy looks kind of cool, or the prize pool. So
The idea of this video was sparked because I saw some people in the comments saying Fnatic can never be considered a dynasty because they haven't won champions. But is there a big enough difference between Masters and Champs to justify such a statement? Remove the name and give each event the same amount of capital, hype, and effort from the organizers. Would you truly see a difference in the results? I decided to look into it by comparing the formats as well as the top placed teams in each event to see if there was some truth to this. And I was surprised by the results. First, we'll be looking into 2021, where Riot started holding their own global tournaments, where teams from different regions were invited to compete. Just remember that in 2021, it was Riot's first try at this, and things were still fresh and chaotic. Nothing really has set in at this point. There were 2 Masters events and Champs at the end. Masters Reykjavik was the first tournament where there was no group stage and seeding was based on points earned in each team's regional tournaments. The winners were Sentinels, with Fnatic, Newturn, and Team Liquid filling out the rest of the top 4. Masters Berlin had the classic group stage that fed into playoffs where teams who performed the best in smaller circuits got a bye. Gambit won it with Envy, 100 Thieves, and G2 being the top placed teams. However, every single one of these teams but G2 were in the group stage. This will be a common thing you notice where having a bye isn't as important as you may think. But let's continue. Champs 2021 had Ascend winning it, with Gambit, Crew, and Team Liquid next to them. None of these teams finished in the top 4 of each event. Some of that was because each org wasn't invited to every international contest, and Valorant Esports was pretty new. But just remember that Masters Berlin results, with the whole group stage and everything. In 2022, we have 2 Masters events that both had a group stage and playoff portion. This was also the year double elimination started to become the norm too. Masters Reykjavik 2022 had Optic winning it, with Loud, Zeta, and PaperX rounding out the top 4. Both Optic and Zeta division were in the group stages, while PaperX and Loud had a bye. The interesting thing is that something similar happened in the next competition, where FPX won Copenhagen, with PaperX, Optic, and Fnatic finishing 2nd, 3rd, and 4th respectively. Both Optic Gaming and Fun Plus Phoenix participated in the group stages, while Fnatic and PaperX skipped them. FPX was in the lower bracket, which was a similar path Optic took in their previous tournament too. So teams that had the most data on them, since they were placed in the group stages, ended up winning it all. That seems pretty weird, right? Well, I believe a big part of this is the fact that Valorant is now an esports of second chances. So even if a team may have more data and time to prep for an opponent, they will still have an opportunity to redeem themselves in the lower bracket, and also learn from their mistakes, which is fair in my opinion, since those who are good at anti-stratting basically can bully other teams. It's like walling in game, where you have a pretty good idea where and what the other team will do. An extreme example, I know. However, the main difference between Masters and Champs is the format, where some teams skip the group stages while others compete in them. The number of teams competing also increases in Champs, but those extra teams are usually filler that typically don't make it far anyways. The best they do is play spoiler to one opponent if they're lucky. Now, if we look at Champs 2022, we see Loud winning it all, with Optic, DRX, and FPX again at the top. Familiar teams. DRX finished in the 5th/6th range in the previous 2 events, and I think we can say Zeta Division's run was kind of an outlier earlier in that year. Still a pretty impressive and an amazing one though. It was the same event that FPX didn't attend because of visa issues, so who knows what could have really happened. They probably would have shook things up. Regardless, those 4 teams and Champs had previous high place finishes in earlier events. We continue to see the teams at the top throughout the year regardless of this slight format change. Why? Because they're just good. Teams who are legit will not constantly be held back by the idea of having a bye or not, especially since they get so many second chances. I think Riot started to either notice or hear people saying something similar and decided to shake things up, with the first event of each year being drastically different than the other 2. We saw it first in 2023 after partnerships became a thing. and Lock-in had a single elimination where all partner teams were invited, as well as 2 Chinese teams. Masters Madrid will have a Swiss-style tournament and only 8 teams this time. Both are very different than the past Masters events we've mentioned, but I'm kinda jumping the gun here. Let's get back on track. Lock-in had Fnatic winning it with Loud, DRX, and Na'Vi being in the top 4. Again, remember this event's format was wildly different. Masters Tokyo had Fnatic in first, followed by Evil Geniuses, Paper X, and NRG. Champs had EG winning it all, while Paper X, Loud, and Fnatic were right there next to them. Those 4 teams in Champs also placed high in earlier events too, similar to 2022. Good teams will not be hindered by these format changes. If anything could stop them, it's the schedule and which event they choose to go all out in. I remember watching a Paper X vlog where the Vibe mentioned he was happy that they got 3rd place rather than 2nd because of the stress these events put on players. Fnatic said something similar, that the scheduling burnt them out. Champs is seen as the pinnacle of Valorant esports because of name and how much hype Riot puts behind it. It's just good branding. This led to the idea that some teams may have chosen not to go all out because they were saving themselves for Champs. I don't 100% think that this is true, but it was a common discourse among Reddit, VLR, and other forums I read. If teams were doing this, then that's not good for Valorant's esports in my opinion. Teams not playing at their best for each global tournament. Why even show up if your mentality is just to use the event as practice? And you can't really blame the teams for having this mentality if this is true, because everyone and their moms are telling you that Champs is the event that matters the most. All the other events are just meh, especially if you're a team that already earned a lot of accolades. Why get just another Masters win when people are only gonna really care and remember those who got Champs anyways? I want you all to take a look at another sport that has multiple tournaments per year. Tennis. They have what we call a Grand Slam, where there are 4 tournaments throughout the year seen as the pinnacle of their profession. Wimbledon, the French, US, and Australian Open. Many argue that Wimbledon is the most popular because of its iconic traditions and history as the oldest of the 4, even though the Australian and US Open's prize pool is higher. For casuals, this is true because the coverage of it globally is the best, while other tennis tournaments can be mixed depending on where you live with time zones. However, if you ask people who actually follow and love tennis to death, there isn't quite a consensus on which one is their favorite. This is because even though they're playing the same sports, there are slight differences among all 4 outside of the formats that give them their unique appeal. Some will say they love the Australian Open because it's the first event of the year where all players are fresh and possibly at their best. It's also known for its hot weather conditions that put a different type of toll on the body versus other tournaments. Then there's the French Open, where it's iconic for being played on clay, which results in a different aesthetic as well as the ball having a lower and slower bounce to it. Next, we have Wimbledon, known for its history, dress code, desserts, and being played on grass, which offers a different visual appeal too. On grass, the ball is at its fastest and has a lower bounce to it versus hard courts. Last, we have the US Open, which for some reason a lot of people get their first tournament win here. Maybe it's because it's the last one played of the year, so many people are worn down. Plus, the crowd is more active and loud versus the likes of Wimbledon and Australia. It's played at night too. The hard surface means the ball is fast and has a high bounce to it, like how it is in Australia. I mentioned the surfaces because it does result in a different type of tennis being played, which leads to different winners too. I remember being in elementary school and Nadal would just dominate the French Open, which wasn't the case before he arrived. It was a very chaotic competition where you didn't know who would win. People still didn't consider it a Mickey Mouse tournament, but rather an event that required a different skill set that is appreciated till this day. Maybe Valorant can do something similar, where instead of a slight format change, there could be a slight in-game or pick change. I'm sure people have already suggested agent bans, and there have been smaller tournaments to do this already. And I have to say it resulted in some funky team comps being played. I think most people will view agent bans as a cheesy contest, or some might claim that it proves which team is the most flexible. We already praise players like Forsaken and Narrate for their mastery on different agents and classes. Maybe the same could be applied to teams. There are other aspects that Riot could tinker with, maybe 2 extra ultimate orbs on the field. This could change up which agents are being played the most because of this. Just imagine, Phoenix on Fracture would go crazy. possibly using his ultimate every other round. Or maybe you tinker with the time itself too. It's no secret that TikTok, Shorts, and Reels are killing our attention span. People want action and they want it often. It's one of the reasons why people love Paper X and why they're so fun to watch, because they give the people what they want. Maybe just 20 seconds overall decrease and increasing the bomb time a little bit to offset this could work. The game is really fun once the bomb gets planted anyways. Keyword is when the bomb gets planted though. These changes could be for Masters while Champs stays the same and seen as the tournament that keeps the game in its purest state. But should there be an event where teams meet up in the same country every year like in tennis? Yes, and I think that should be Tokyo, Japan.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Yeah, that's right, baby. This whole video was a ploy for me to pitch more Japanese Valorant events. I don't really care if there's little to no difference between Masters and Champs. It's still fun Valorant to watch nonetheless in my opinion. But without a doubt, Riot seems to care enough to change the format still. Of course, I know there's a problem with one host country claiming a spot in 3 of the major events. Even if you add a 4th event, that would be tasking on players. Edward Gaming played like 50 tier 1 games in 2023, while Fnatic and Evil Geniuses had like 30. Many top teams complain about the strain that the schedule had last year. That was more because of how close the tournaments were played though, and not enough rest was given in between them. Actually, if I think about it, maybe you could add a 4th tournament if the spacing was right and the offseason wasn't so long. That's something completely different though, and I might not be 100% sure if I even like that either. Nonetheless, I think there isn't much difference between your standard Masters events that have your group stages and then your playoff portions when comparing to Champs. It's just hype really, but the likes of tennis, CSGO, and Valorant have multiple in a year. I don't think it's fair to discredit or lower the bar of a team winning an international event where the best of the best are still competing. If you disagree, tell me why. What truly makes Champs different than a regular Masters event to justify that a team can't be seen as a dynasty if they don't win it? Is it the format? The same one where we see multiple past winners come from the group stage regardless? There's actually been more winners who were in the group stages than the ones who got a bye. Is it the added number of teams? The same teams who are considered filler and don't make it far anyways? Remove the name and give each event the same amount of capital, hype, and effort from organizers. Would you truly see a difference in the results?